Hello everybody, and welcome to this month's free PGC webinar with the lovely Amy Chen-Mills name. So before we start, I'll say a few words about the free PGC, which is the Free Principle Global Community, and it's a voluntary organization whose aim is to spread the word about the free principle worldwide. Now I'd like to introduce Amy. Amy is the author of State of Mind in the Classroom, which is that's her new book, and The Spark Insight, which is a special book for youth. She co-founded the Center for Sustainable Change with her late father, Dr. Roger Mills. She has been an international trainer of the Free Principle for more than 17 years, and she is also a trainer's trainer. Amy studied with Syd Banks and has worked with children, youth, families, and communities across the USA. She's also an award-winning writer and journalist and hosts her own bi-weekly radio show on the Front Porch with Amy Chen, Spiritual Dialogue for the 21st Century. So I'd like to pass the mic now to Amy. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you. That was the most beautiful reading of my bio I have ever heard because of the accent. I loved it. I always want my biography to be read in French with a French accent now. Or even in French would be better. So I want to welcome everyone. I can't see you. I can only see Karine, but I will be able to, I think, hear your questions. And I'm at home in my home office. There may be some noises. I'm hearing the garbage trucks right at this moment, of course. So just please forgive any of those noises as we go along. I'm really excited to be here with all of you because the topic, I think, is something that all of us reflect on, and we could sometimes say struggle with when the emotions are painful. And that is the topic of being spiritual and being human. And I just want to also thank you for coming today to the webinar, because your interest, your presence, your creating a space in a busy lifetime with many goals and agendas to reflect with others on this question, myself or anyone, is already, you know, part of the answer. So much of, to me, what we discover in our spiritual lives and our human lives is about our intent. It's simply about where we're pointing ourselves. And you know, Syd has said, there's so many great quotes that he has, and one of them is, there's an answer for everything. And so if there's a struggle within about anything, this topic or anything, the simple intention, or, you know, almost prayer, I'd like to know, or I'd like to be free, or I'd like to find out, or I'd like to discover, or I know there's a different way, a better way. Like, once that is a part of your consciousness, which is really consciousness wanting to know itself, maturing to the point where it's ready to begin to know itself, to experience itself before thought forms and personality and worldly goals and desires. There's no stopping that impulse. You know, it's, oh, you know, there may be fear, there may be backing up, there may be some stumbling along the way, possible conflicts, but if that's where you're headed, you know, that's where you're gonna get to. You know, either in this particular culture of the three principles, but honestly, the truth will lead you anywhere. And you just have to be there. It's you unfolding in the most perfect way. So to get to the topic, and I'll just share a few thoughts about the topic, and then I'd love to hear your questions, because I feel that you bring the agenda to the meeting. It's your meeting. You're the ones that committed to this meeting, so it's for you. So I'd like to be in service to your questions and comments and insights to share. But as I was reflecting, I told Corrine that as I was reflecting on the topic of being spiritual and being human, the word that kept occurring to me was a simple yes. That's it. We are both spiritual beings, and we are quote unquote human beings. Human is something that we think may not be spiritual, and yet because humanity or humanness arises from the spiritual, it is a product of the spiritual. It is also spiritual. The product of our thinking is a product of the divine principle of thought. And therefore, there's nothing unspiritual about anything that we think. It's all a product of spirit. So as we begin to see that and settle into the source of that, understanding that we can't escape the source of thinking or consciousness or mind, then it doesn't matter so much what it is that we're creating that feels so very human, because there becomes a sense of conviction or a lack of doubt about what it is that we already are and that we always have been. We always have been consciousness. We always have been spiritual. There's been nothing to gain. There may have been a sense of gaining ground with spirituality, becoming more spiritual, and yet this is what you have always been. And so the proof, if I can offer you proof, is that when your mind does become quiet, which you've experienced probably since you're on this webinar, and you've experienced some quieting or sense of insight based on what you've learned about the principles, you understand what the default setting is. You understand that pure consciousness is beneath every human thought or struggle, psychological struggle, situational struggle, which is usually psychological, right? So to me, to fully embrace being human, understanding that human thoughts or negative thoughts will arise, personal thought will arise, it will always arise. There'll be no end to that. There may be less of that. There may be less attachment to that. There may be less energy that's put in to that, or less energy that's put into following a particular thought. But to take ownership of that and to make it a judgment against oneself would be a mistake. Because how do you stop a thought from coming in? I think Syd used to say that too. You can't stop a thought from coming in. So this being human business will continue. And, I'm sorry, that's the bad news. But the good news is that you don't have to care. You don't have to care because you understand that what you are, what you always have been, is untouched. So there were some other things we were going to talk about. I mean, I can mention maybe one I'd like to bring up for the sake of discussion, which is that there can be sort of two things that happen. One is that when we have negative thoughts, when we have judgmental thoughts, we add to those thoughts with our own self-judging thoughts for having those thoughts. So we're just sort of perpetuating the cycle of more thinking, more thinking, more thinking. And that's very common. That's a very human condition. Well, in any self-help or spiritual movement, thinking about where we're at within that movement, within the framework of the movement, or the idea of consciousness and enlightenment, or the idea of innate well-being? Where are we at? And again, that's just more thinking, more personal thinking. So to really just be okay with the humanness, because I have a family, and enough said, right? That's there's humanness happening here. I guarantee it. I could go into detail, but you might find it, a bit too familiar. Like, I get upset with my children. I get upset with my husband. I have sometimes a feeling of going through a great sort of like crisis of spirit. Something very challenging. And so all of that, I think, is just, if we can accept that and almost embrace it as part of our being human, then it becomes something interesting. And this is the other piece, which is that sometimes people will say, oh, well, it's all just thought and it doesn't matter, and I can therefore sort of think and behave in any manner. And you'll have people who have been studying spirituality or the principles for many years who run around behaving like quite badly, and that's also not quite what I'm speaking to. What I'm speaking to is that when we stop personalizing our human thinking, our personal thinking, when we stop taking so much blame or credit for it, then it becomes our kind of like three principles curriculum. It's like life is the curriculum, and our thinking arises, and it's just something to see, and something to. I have one of my favorite teachers talks about being vigilant, which means when thoughts arise that are uncomfortable or angry, it's not that we have to do anything with them, but we do notice, we do tell the truth. We're not pretending we're not having those thoughts. We're not saying that they might not be hurtful to others, because we can be. That's the human condition. It's the world of form. And so sometimes it takes courage, and Syd used to talk about courage. I don't hear it as much, and maybe I just haven't been in the right circles, but it sometimes takes courage to tell the truth about thoughts we may not want to let go of, thoughts about others or about ourselves. But it's just that little bit of courage that just opens the door to, oh yeah, okay, I could let go. I mean, I've been in spaces where I could feel that I could let go. It would be good to let go, but I still didn't really want to let go. It was like, so I just gave myself time in the noticing. I mean, to me, vigilance is just, it's noticing, and noticing deeply. Telling the truth about what's really happening. Is it out there, or is it in here? So I think I might just end with that, because I'd love to hear your questions and comments, if there's anything that you would like for me to speak to.
Thank you, Amy. I'm just going to remind people, for you people watching from Google+, you should see on the toolbar, which should be on the left-hand side of your screen, there should be like a little bubble with a Q&A in it. If you click on that and type your question, we'll be able to see it and answer it live. So don't be shy, go ahead. Give it a few seconds so people can have the time to type. And waiting for them, I have actually a question, Amy. You talk about not personalizing. Do you link that to ego?
Oh, that's a wonderful question, because one of the quotes that I used to describe the webinar was from Syd. You cannot get rid of the ego, but you can find out what it is so that it does not control you. And so, yes, I mean, to me, and people have different definitions of words and different ways of viewing ego, and ego is okay, ego is not okay. Um, to me, ego is just that thinking that is about a self concept. Syd used to call ego the image of self importance. And for me, it's come down to the image of a self. So, for example, when we are feeling hurt, or when we are feeling defensive, or when we're feeling like we need to prove ourselves, what is that related to? It's related to a self concept that is really just a bunch of a bunch of thoughts. You know, it's thoughts about our past, sort of collected together. It's sort of the life story, the name, the body, the whole. We have this image of ourselves in mind, an image in thought. And it's this that we care so much about, we think. So it's sort of we go on automatic in defending this image, or protecting this image, or trying to create some kind of advantage for this image, you know, a goal of some kind will then enhance the image. You know, if we, you know, write a book, if we have a huge coaching practice, you know, like that will then make us feel fulfilled, because our self-image will then be improved in some way. It's all thought. The whole thing, the self-concept itself, is thought. So when you see that, then there's nothing. That's why people talk about emptiness, because there's nothing. There's nothing there. there's just consciousness, you know, and certainly there's the habitual thinking that comes and goes, and the idea of the self will arise. You know, Syd said you can't get rid of it, but to know what it is, so that it does not control you, so that your actions are not based on this illusionary self-concept that actually cannot be fulfilled, because fulfillment is the absence of the idea of thinking about a self, or what's the word, self-consciousness. Fulfillment is the absence of all of these thoughts. It's already there. It's pre-self-concept. So this is a wonderful question, because this is at the heart, sort of the thinking to me that's at the heart of everything else. You know, that if we take blame for our humanness, our humanity, it's because we think that there's a self that is not progressing properly. I don't know if you can follow. I mean, I've shared this in some groups, like I shared in England, and one woman said she was sitting there listening and listening to me, and then at one point she started to laugh. She just started to laugh, and I said, during the break, I said, "What happened to you?" I was curious, and she said, "Oh, I just saw that everything was around this self-concept, this ego identity that I have, and it's so funny how much effort we put into it." But she said at first she couldn't understand what I was talking about. Like, she was like, "That, I don't get that. I don't get that." And then in a burst of clarity, she just got it, that it doesn't matter, you know, whether we whether we have a good reputation or a bad reputation. I mean, none of that has anything to do with what we call innate wellness or innate well-being.
Thank you, Amy. People are very quiet tonight. I think they're all in a very quiet place.
Oh, well, that's good. I mean, except for that, we might not have much to talk about.
I'm sure we have plenty of more to add.
Well, I guess I can ask people just in general, you know, how this is hitting you. Is it making sense, or is there a part that is not clear?
in the previous section, you talk about noticing more deeply, and noticing, it's a concept that, yeah, you need to notice. As you notice, you kind of deepen your understanding. I'd like you to talk a bit more, if you can, about the noticing more deeply. What kind of do you mean? Because I'm a bit...
Well, it all seems so natural to me, you know. I mean, we can think about noticing as something to do, but I sort of feel like at this point that everything happens. I mean, we have no control. So we have no control from the standpoint of ego. You know, the ego may try to control the learning process and be frustrated, but really we have no control over consciousness, you know, or pure consciousness. So it seems to me that if there's anything I can say, it would be just within your experience, consciousness arising for you, you know, sort of reminding you. Whatever I say is just an invitation to consciousness arising in you. And so I think that as we simply have the sincerity to notice, then we will experience the deeper noticing. We'll experience the courage to change our minds. That's another thing Syd has talked about, is sometimes people need the strength or the courage to change their minds, you know, or at least it feels like that. So I think it's paying attention to your feeling and then going back to the understanding, the logic of the principles, that even this is coming from you. If that makes sense.
Yes, it does, Amy. I have one question. Let me get to it. Someone asked, do you think there are genetic components at play in terms of addictions, shyness, etc., or is it all thought? I think you already answered that, but it might be good to...
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, we live in a world of form. You know, we have bodies, we have genes, we have the parents, you know, we have grandparents, and to me there's a bit of mystery to it all, you know, that thought has always operated for human beings, and thought has always been part of the creation of these different generations, how they behaved and what their proclivities were, what their tendencies were. Maybe that was manifesting in the body for them as well. So the difference between form and formless, to me, it's, you know, you could say, well, the body is form and thought is formless. I don't know if there's really a separation. So to me, I would say, yes, there's probably a genetic component to many things, you know, and yet everything can be rediscovered in the light of the principles. You know, like if you're in a situation where you are trying to decide what to do about something, you know, go with your wisdom, go with your common sense. You know, if there's something physical that can be done, maybe that makes sense. But to not shut the door to a deeper unfolding of the mystery of thought, and how that might play into shyness, or play into alcoholism, or play into addiction. Like, to just always keep that door open, because, you know, more will be revealed.
Okay, we have another question. When you experience the defaucetting and a realization that thought is illusion on one occasion, how do you not overthink this and try to find this state again?
What was the first part, when you realize?
When you experience the defaucetting and a realization that thought is illusion on one occasion, How
Yes.
do you not overthink this and try to find this state again?
Yeah. Don't overthink it. It's contained in the question. And you may try to overthink, but notice that. Notice that there's thinking and allow that thinking as well. I think there's something very powerful about allowing, and this is perfect for the topic of being human, to allow the feelings of being human, to really allow them to be there and to allow the overthinking to occur as well. It doesn't mean engaging and perpetuating, but if it's happening and there doesn't seem to be much to be done, then to just fully allow, because really the space, the default setting is total allowance, isn't it? It's total. The default setting allows everything to be. The default setting is the space in which everything is happening. So there's something about not resisting, which is more thought, not trying to change, which is more thought, not creating an ideal experience in one's mind, which is more thought, and going back to allowing and not knowing how to get back into the default setting, not knowing how to stop the thinking. Allowing is already is already consciousness.
Thank you, Amy. Hold on. I was on one. I lost it now. Okay, I am. I work with people that struggle with panic attacks, but it seems everyone gets it, the free principle, at their own pace. It seems the harder someone is struggling, the longer they resist. Any advice to help shine the light sooner, or does it just happen?
The longer someone is what?
It seems the harder someone is struggling, the longer they resist. And the question is, any advice to help shine the light sooner, or does it just happen?
Well, of course it just happens. That's what happened for all of us. Just who could have predicted the moment, in which we had the insight that, oh, this is truth. So that's true. And yet, as a practitioner, you're working with people, and this is your job, to help them understand or see the principles. I would say, since I'm not working with your client and you're asking the question, that it comes back to us and how much we may feel like we want to change someone, how much there may be anxiety within us about trying to change or helping someone to see. And it becomes a part of our self-concept. I'm not saying this about the particular person who wrote the question. I don't know if that's true. But this is what arises for me, is that the less I care about clients or others understanding the principles, the more I'm able to share freely without being anxious, and trying to figure out the right formulation of what to say, but just to really respond naturally. Knowing that if I lose a client, if the client doesn't get the principles, or maybe they don't get it in that particular set of sessions this year or what have you, that it's not on me. It doesn't relate to me. Really. You do your best, but really letting go of the attachment to how are my clients doing is just very profound.
Thank you, Amy. So you have a person that asked two things. So I'm going to read the first thing she said and then the second one, so you might be able to answer all together. So she said, "Hi, Amy. My friend Anne has spoken so highly of you, and I am having a huge battle with myself today. I have been faced with thoughts of instability in a way which I have not experienced before. I lost my son 7 years ago tragically, so I feel a lot of pain." That's her first thing. And then she asked, sorry. "There is a sense of not being in touch with yourself. I feel unclear as to how we get to a deeper understanding of self."
Well, there is no real deeper understanding of self. You know, the self is. You know, it's like saying I want a deeper understanding of air. It's here. I mean, maybe, you know, you could argue with that metaphor and say you could study the molecules, but it's here. It's already here. Self is here. So self as consciousness in you or as you is already, it's a done deal. There's nothing to understand about it. What you can pay attention to is, you know, how thought is creating worry and how thought creates maybe the missing of the sun, and, you know, and how it changes. You know, one moment there's gratitude for the sun and special moments, and then there may be thoughts of regret, and then there may be thoughts of things you can't do with the sun, and then there may be thoughts of feeling like he's here. So to just see the nature of thought around these issues that you are in, and to just trust that life is supporting you regardless of what you think it's doing, you know, to you. I just had a conversation with a woman yesterday. It was remarkable. She's not a three principles person, although she may come to work for me and with me for a little while. But so I was talking to her along those lines, and she lost everything. Her husband was a doctor, and they had many homes, you know, therefore their net worth was probably in the millions, you know, given homes in California. And she said it all disappeared. Her husband passed away 3 years ago. It all disappeared. And she has no home. She's been staying with her daughters. And she said for 3 years she struggled after her husband died. It was a terrible struggle, which is the human. You know, we're not resisting that or judging that. That's what happens. You know, thoughts arise and they're painful and they're frightened. And yet, if I can offer her your story as a beacon of hope, she woke up one day and it just didn't matter. She said she had to sell all of her furniture, everything gone. She has a car and everything that she owns fits in the car, and she has a dog. And she said, I now feel so free. And she started to cry in telling me this story. Here's a woman who literally is, you know, homeless. Luckily she has family to stay with, but she doesn't have her own home. She's staying with her college-age daughter, who is in a room with a bunch of roommates, you know, so they're sleeping together in like a twin bed. And she's found freedom, and she's found well-being, and she's grateful to her experience for pointing her so radically in the direction of herself. So the self is what you surrender to. when you're tired of fighting with all your thinking, that self is there. And it takes some letting go. I trust that, you will let go when the time is right. Just surrender to the thoughts themselves, in the sense of not struggling against them, but letting them be, and being still within the whirlwind of the thinking, not running from thoughts. I hope that was helpful. It's hard to just hear the questions and not see the person, but I hope that was helpful. And God bless you.
Thank you, Amy. There is another question which is a bit in similar lines, so see what you want to make of it, Amy. So, can you talk about how you view grief, loss, for example, job, loved one, pet, from a spiritual sense, which kind of touch on that?
Well, when you begin to identify, which is a tricky word, when you begin to understand that you are consciousness, that you are this spiritual energy, that you have always been this spiritual energy. Every time your mind has become quiet, from childhood and infancy until today, you have experienced self, what people call self. And I think Syd might call pure consciousness. When you begin to really settle into that, everything is a part of that self. You realize that every experience has arisen within that self and disappeared within that self. And it's all a part of you. The way you think creates different experiences within that self. Like my father who passed away, sometimes I miss him, missing thinking, and other times I appreciate so much the experience of self that he was, that particular life form, that particular appearance in consciousness, and still with me, still an influence, still alive. So the less we pay attention to forms come and go. We will come and go. This body will come and go. Everything will come and go. It's kind of remarkable to me that we are surprised when people and pets die, because that's so obvious, that's how the system is set up. So the idea of death can be an invitation. The idea of loss can be an invitation to discover consciousness which does not come and go, and what that encompasses, which is everything you've experienced, everything you will experience, the bodily experience, all contained within consciousness and within love. When you settle into that, the pain, it's a non-issue, because you realize things that come and go come and go. What doesn't come and go is love. Whether you associate that love with a particular form, or whether you really are, sort of like in a universal bliss love state, it's the same thing. Go all the way into it. If you loved your dog or your father or your husband or your child, go all the way in.
Thank you, Amy. The previous person who asked the question said, thank you so much for your words of wisdom and clarity. So, okay. So we have another question on ego again. So it's, can the ego seek to preserve itself by not allowing you to see the illusion of thought and the illusion of the ego?
Yes. But it's, I don't like entitizing the ego as a as self-acting, because it becomes like almost another being within one system. That's not so in my experience. My experience is just that it's thought. So we can identify with those thoughts of who we are and what we need and what what we like and what we don't like and how we're being treated and how we're not being, and all of that. And I'm not saying either that in this world of form we don't make choices. If we're being treated very badly, it's common sense to leave a relationship or a situation. Like that's not this discussion. That's your life choice, and that's valid. If it's wisdom, if it makes sense to you, we get to choose how we want to live in this world of form. But in terms of just ego in general, and all the trouble it causes, that's unnecessary. Just to see that, who is it? I mean, this is a question that's been passed down through the ages by the most realized beings, the most mystical humans have encouraged us to ask the question, who is it that cares? Who is it that is afraid? Who is it that is having the thought? And then you look within, you find there's no one there. There's something there, which people have called nothing. It's the nothingness that's the somethingness. It's a quiet mind. So what's creating ego? What's before ego? Ego may be even useful. Some people say ego is useful. You have to develop a sense of self to get by in this world. That may be true. I don't know. It may be less true these days in my mind, but I don't like the idea of entitizing the ego. But if it can be helpful from time to time to be like, oh, there's that old ego, and if that creates some distance, hallelujah, like, how do we grow? The field is wide open, and whatever feels right that works for you, where you're feeling more free, I my hat's off to that. There must be, an infinite, I was going to say a billion or a trillion, but really it's an infinite number of ways that truth can arise or wisdom can arise for any one of us. So I don't like to say what's correct in terms of how we should think. Maybe the wisest thing that the principles bring to us, or that Syd brought, was to go with the feeling.
Thanks, Amy. We have another question. Could you please shine your light on feedback? I was asked to give feedback lately for a program. I saw that what came up all boils down to just my personal thinking. By seeing that it didn't make sense to give feedback, as it begins to look like judgment.
Well, I think it's, that's a wonderful insight. And I think it's in that moment, this person had an insight about feedback and personal opinions. And that's beautiful. And there might be another situation in which feedback is actually very appropriate, So, so I see, this is where the form and the formless come into play, because when we create an ideology, a way of being, feedback is good, feedback is not good, we should teach the principles in this particular way or in that particular way, or we need to always, I don't know. I mean, Syd was an interesting person because he was so uninteresting in a way. I mean, he was a welder. He was very simple. He lived a simple life. He was a blue-collar worker. He didn't read widely. And so we've actually, I've experienced, since I sort of grew up with the three principles and Syd, we create sort of a culture around the spirituality that we're learning. And that can be based on the personality of our teacher. It can be based on an insight about feedback. Even within our own personal spiritual culture, we can start to hold on to something as a form, as a rule in thought. And I say, throw it all away. You know, have the insight, experience that, of course, you will, that's natural, but don't create a formulation. So I don't know. I don't have an opinion about feedback.
Thank you, Amy. The last two are actually not questions, but it's nice comments, so I will read them. The first one is lovely to be with you all. That was very nice, Jennifer. And we have also, Tis has wonderful questions. So many new ideas for me. Not really question, but nice comment. So I'll pass them on. Yeah. We have no more question, Amy. So if you want to wrap up, you know.
Oh yeah, we're almost at the end of the hour anyway. So no, I just I'm so pleased to be here and grateful to 3PGC for what they're doing. I understand most people are volunteering. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, like, how wonderful. And I feel that the organization has been very open and supportive of all people, practitioners and members. And so I just really want to thank, I don't even know who is making all the decisions about 3PGC at this point in time, but to thank the organization. And if anyone's interested in my work or events or the radio show, I have a new website and everything is pretty much there. It's www.amychen.com, and that's Amy with an I. And I have a Facebook page that's called Amy Chen Coaching and Education. So if you would like to say hi, like, that's a good place. Pop up on Facebook and say hello, and I'd love to hear from you. So thank you so much, and God bless you all, and as you unfold.
Thank you very much, Amy, for this lovely webinar. So thank you everybody for watching, and see you next month. Thank you again. Bye-bye.